discussing Teshuvah Ilo, the supernal form of penitence of return. Teshuvah, to return the hay in God's name and in our soul. And it's not as a result of sin, of doing something wrong, but it's because God's infinite, we're finite, and there's always a return that the soul wants always to get closer and closer to God. Whenever you feel something in you that's pushing you, and sometimes it might go in the wrong direction, know that deep down what it is a push to get closer to God Almighty. So, this return is returning the former hay in God's name. In the Tetragrammaton, Shem Havaya, Yud and a hay and a vav, and the latter hay. As we explained, they refer to the 10 attributes, 10 divine attributes. So the Alter Rebbe says, well, if the return is a return to God based on a distance, God's infinite, we're finite, we feel the distance, and therefore that creates a strong longing, a great thirst to get closer. Like in human relations, right? A man and a woman, there's a distance. Because of the distance, there's a desire to get close. Then from the closeness, creates another distance, and then again coming together. That's actually the cycle of the mikvah. The mikvah, the bath ritualarium, which a woman engages in after her menstrual cycle. So on a deeper level, it's actually is symbolic of the relationship between man and woman. Man and women are men don't come from Mars and women don't come from Venus. Men come from Chachma and women come from Bina. And they're two worlds apart. They're two worlds apart. The world today wants to tell you that there's an equality and they're all the same. No, not the same at all. And the whole point is, two worlds apart need to come together. As Basar Echad is one flesh, one being, which is a challenge. It's a great challenge. And that's the whole point, is that there should be a challenge. How do you get close? Well, by first appreciating that there is a difference and that there's a need to come together, to cleave, to be one. That recognition. And there's much more on this topic. The point over here is, to bring it back to our idea over here, is that there's also a distance between the human, even with their godly soul, and God. And therefore we need to bring a unity and a oneness together. Teshuvah, Teshuvah, to return, to become close. That closeness is a bond out of love, out of awe, ultimately even. A sense of the greatness of God, and that produces an awe that creates the cleaving and the oneness, the unity to return and be united with God. So if that's the case, why are we returning the hay? The hay represents Bina, understanding. In the Vav represents the emotions. We're talking about getting close to God through love and awe of God. Not as a result of the sin that propels us, but the love and awe of the soul that we reveal, that becomes now bound up in and bound up with God, returning, it seems, the Vav, but not the hay. So the Alter Rebbe explains, there are two types of love. There's an inherent bond that we have with God that's part of the soul, and that's not the love we're talking about over here. The love we're talking about over here is intellectually produced. It's produced from understanding God, understanding the ways of God, understanding God as creator within creation, understanding our relationship with God. All of that a person would meditate upon, right, would bring then, funnel from the mind, it should seep into the heart and produce a love and awe of God. That's the love and awe of God, that this is about returning to God. Teshuvah, to return to God with a intellectually generated. So that's the Teshuvah, to return the hay, because hay refers to bina of the soul, the understanding of the soul. When the soul will understand the greatness of God, then that will feed into the emotions that we will feel a love and awe towards God. That's the concept over here. I hope that's clear. This is termed the mother crouching over the chicks. The mother being Bina, father is Chochmah, right? Father is the seminal seed. Mother is Bina, the gestation of taking that seed and developing it. Intellectually, man is the Chochmah, the ingenuity, the seminal idea. Woman is the elaboration, the development of it. That's Bina, binyan, to build. And that's what the woman, that's the female, the female trait. Now, men have Bina and women have Chochmah, but women are more endowed with Bina and men are more endowed with Chochmah, as a generality, obviously, as a generality. So this is the metaphor of the mother who's crouching over the chicks, the mother giving birth to the chicks. Bina gives birth to emotions. Chachma doesn't give birth to emotions. Chachma is too elusive, is too abstract. The idea is not, there isn't clarity in any idea in Chachma. It's just that flash of ingenuity. Bina is a full development. That's where you can meditate upon that which you have an understanding of, and that can then, through that meditation, create something. Emotions towards God, a love and awe towards God. That then will find itself in a desire that the soul, the person, wants to cleave spirit to spirit, our spirit to God's spirit, to have, as the verse says in Shir Shirim, he kisses me with the kisses of his mouth. What does that mean? How does he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth? Because right now we're studying Torah. That's a divine kiss. There's two things in the kiss. One is the movement of the lips in kissing, and the other is the exchange of breath. So when God is kissing us, when we study his Torah, as we're doing now, and expressing it in words, then, first of all, the words that we are saying are his words. We're mouthing his mouth. That's the physical act of the two lips coming together, or the four lips coming together. And then we have the breath. The breath means that part of God, the divine wisdom of God, now enters into me. His wisdom becomes my wisdom. His vision becomes my vision, in being that it now enters within the individual. So that's what happens, that when we meditate upon the greatness of God, we'll want to cleave to him by the study of Torah, understanding what's going on through this study of Torah. And we'll also want to cleave to him, our spirit with his spirit. What does that mean? Cleaving our spirit to him, Mitch, in the love of God, means that we want to be like God. We want to emulate God. That's what cleaving means, right? You want to emulate God. So just as God is compassionate, so are we. Just as God is kind, so are we kind. So we have the intelligence now through Torah that's a part of me the emotions, that we cleave to God, and our spirit to His, and meaning that we are compassionate like He is and kind as He is. And then we bring that into our minds to think like Him. How do we think like Him? By studying Torah, His wisdom, of course. And then we speak His words of Torah, and then we bring that into action. How do we bring it into action? You see, when you're compassionate like God, compassion is an emotion. That emotion now needs to be brought into thought, speech, and action. It needs to be expressed. So, how do you express it? By giving to another. Someone who is down and out, we give them tzedakah. We give them tzedakah. So here we have the returning of the hay, the higher level of teshuvah. It was not propelled, it was not compelled. It wasn't because of my sins. It's because of a sense of distance that I want to get close, and I meditate upon the greatness of God, the truth of Him, the reality of Him as creator within creation, within my world, that's going to create again a longing, a desire to get closer, to cleave. My spirit and His spirit, His kiss within me, to long to connect again through Torah study, through being compassionate like as God, kind as God, and that should have self-expression in thought, speech, and action, ultimately. That's a powerful idea. But this, then the Alter Rebbe says, if you recall in chapter 4, we had mentioned that the sin of shivcha, zera levatala, of wasteful emission of semen, that the regular teshuvah does not help. The lower level of teshuvah, it's a sin, and yet you can't do teshuvah just by the lower level, as we've explained previously, teshuvah totam, returning the latter hay in God's name and in our soul. But you need to do the higher level of teshuvah, what we just spoke about. And now the Alter Rebbe explains why. Because this higher level is predicated or is based on intelligence. It's based on understanding and meditating and thinking about the greatness of God, God's reality, God's providence in my life, the world around me, so on and so forth, that produces then a feeling, right? And from there, that feeling is expressed in a desire to cleave, to connect, to return to God. And therefore, we're returning, coming closer to Him, and expressing that in our garments of self-expression, thought, speech, and action, right? So, the sin of wasteful emission, as we've learned in the first part of Tanya in chapter 2, that the semen is a physical thing that begins in the mind and the brain. That's where it begins. Just as a digression for a moment, one of the things I do is run a crisis addiction center, and addiction, many components to it, but one of the components is the way the mind is wired, and makes a person more predisposed to certain kind of behaviors. And likewise, sexuality is more something in our minds than it is of a physical thing. That's why where our minds are very important when it comes to this issue. Where our head is, we're looking at, which becomes what we think about, is very important. So the semen, as we learned in chapter 2, its physical reality begins in the brain. And therefore the thoughts of the individuals at the end of chapter 2 are very important in relations between husband and wife, because that's where it begins. It's a physical act that begins in the mind. So, in order to fix this blemish, you have to touch the mind. And therefore, this second level, or the higher level of Teshuvah ilah, that is based on the intelligence of the individual, that they use their mind to understand God, the greatness of God, as best as an individual can, that's how it's going to rectify this problem, this blemish. It needs to now have the kiss of God in the individual to the degree that God's wisdom becomes our wisdom, His vision becomes our vision, and therefore we start looking at the world the way He does, and therefore, rectifying the blemish that was caused through wasteful emission. And how will that be expressed in this way, particularly in using the mind? The study of Torah. Not just the greatness of God, but to study His Torah particularly, and to study in a way that is, as a result of this, you are dedicated even more so. So if you used to study for, 1 page, now study 2 pages. If you used to study 2 pages, now study 4 pages. In other words, you're going beyond your nature in engaging your mind in the study of Torah. Alter Rebbe concludes that this is with a beautiful metaphor. Through the sin of wasteful emission, so what you've done is severed a connection. But we can do Teshuvah. We have to do the higher level of Teshuvah. And what that does is now you take that severed rope and you knot it back together, a double knot, a 4-time knot, right? That's what's happening, a fourfold thicker knot. What does that mean? It means now that you're more deeply connected with God than you were previously because of doing this higher level of Teshuvah ilah, returning the former hey in God's name. In other words, Bina, understanding Torah, the ways of God, His teachings, and doubling up on the teachings. You double up on your connection with God. You do more, this is how you're going to fix and mend the blemish. Powerful idea, beautiful idea. And this is the true offering that we can give to God, because there's no truth other than Torah. What a kindness God has done for us. I hope that's clear. Binyamin of Poway, thank you for joining. Abba from Crown Heights. Penina from Saratoga, New York. Erin is with us from Colombia. And Fagi, thank you for joining. Juraj from Bratislava, good afternoon. From Tulsa, we have Shimon. Art is with us from Michigan. Diane from London, Ontario. And Sandy, good morning. My son Label, thank you for joining. Leanne, thank you for joining us too. Anita, yes, awesome it is. Thank you. Yes, how we can wash away things, right? Rena from Colorado, thank you. Alicia, shalom. And who else is with us? All right, folks. Josh, Stephen. Thank you, Sigalit. All right, I'm glad that there's clarity and amazing teachings that gives us a great hope. Yes, absolutely. Folks, sharing is caring. Please share the Alter Rebbe's teachings with others. Wishing everybody a good Erev Shabbos, a wonderful Shabbos Eve as we prepare for Shabbos. A wonderful good Shabbos to everybody. And God willing, we will see you after Shabbos. Be well.